This final session of this wonderful conference is going to be a collection of commentaries, very brief. Each of us will take 5 minutes or less to summarize in our respective sessions that we've moderated. What are the common themes? What are the challenges? What are the interesting key ideas that were presented that will help us better understand and encourage better relations between the U.S. and the various countries of Asia? And so I guess we will go ahead and I suggest we proceed in the order that the sessions occurred. So that means I will go last.
And I'll go first. Okay, so it seems a common theme that emerged following yesterday and today is the recognition that economic growth seems to be of interest across regions, across countries, and in fact, a very standard desire across the globe. Having said that, the conference tried to address US-Asia relations. We were thinking about how to engage with Asia, what are Asia's interests vis-a-vis the US. But at the core, we still continue to engage Asia in fragments. We really have not been able to define, and we recognize that too. We haven't been able to define what constitutes Asia. When we try to address relations between US and Asia, that too was through particular countries. And it appeared there were certain economic zones, certain regions. But I think it's a conceptual problem, and it's also a problem in part given the size and diversity of Asia, given the various histories out of which Asia emerges, given the priorities out of which, priorities that different countries within Asia have, given their colonial past, that to a large extent shapes the understanding of Asia. So perhaps acknowledging the historical context of Asia, both in relation to one another, as well as by one another, I mean within and among countries in Asia, as well as with the US, could perhaps help us first address what this Asia really means to us. And having said that, then perhaps it would also be important to recognize that there are some very real interests between India, China, or the region in bilateral relations within Asia amongst countries that shape how they are going to act in a global context as well. India-Pakistan relation is an important one, right? I mean, and a crucial one, critical one to try and understand it. And if we go back past in the Cold War period, then we understand the different approaches India and Pakistan had towards Soviet Union or the United States. Now, the final point I'd like to make also is about the importance of this multinational or global institutions like the UN perhaps. If we are trying to think of multiple countries working together, or if we are trying to engage with different countries, then it has to go beyond country level, right? It has to emerge onto a platform that creates a space for each country to emerge not only on paper or on theory, but actually in practice emerge as equal actors perhaps, or at least recognize other countries that are emerging. And the context in which India, let's say, exists now is very different from the context it existed 50 years ago. So we perhaps have to address that to create strong international institutions that recognize this difference that has come about. I think I have that to say. All right?
Very good. Okay, good, thank you. Then I'll go next, and I'll slip back into my role more of a sociologist, which is we talk more in like broad general abstractions that nobody understands, so I'm pretty good at that. The first thing I want to say, actually, that from our group is that the question becomes more of a coordination of message across institutions and groups, so that basically what you have to have is some sort of understanding something that hasn't existed in the past, and if it has existed in the past, it's changed, just as Ari has said, through all kinds of different sorts of contexts. But there is a history for sure, and there's a language that we're still searching for. And that leads us to sort of the role of the United States vis-a-vis Asia. And that's very, very difficult to capture. But I was thinking of, it was actually the farewell address to India by the Ambassador Daniel P. Moynihan. And he was quite the dynamic person. And at the end of his, I think, 3 years, they asked him, "So Ambassador Moynihan, what have you learned?" And he paused for a minute and he said, "I learned that there is a God." And he said, "Really? You learned that there is a God? How did you learn that?" And he said, "I got up every morning at 5 o'clock. I opened the windows, I opened the shade, I looked down on the street, and I said to myself, my God, how could this still be going on?" And what he was saying is that I don't understand it. Where's the order? It's all chaos. And really what he finally came to understand was there may be a God, there may not be a God, but there is an underlying order to that message that he was getting, and that it's not chaos, but it's just an order that we still have yet to understand. And so if you think about some of the first messages that were given in Ari's presentation, they were saying that we answer with boots more quickly than anything else. Wouldn't it be more interesting, in some sense, to answer with an army of cultural anthropologists who explain that message to us so that we can start to become more non-normative, in a sense? We're able to understand before we act. So I think that's a general summation of the points with a lot of technicalities left out, but I think that's what I would say.
Okay, and I'll go next. I think if you listened across all of these panels, and certainly on the security one of the primary themes that came out is, and it is related to language too, the need to redefine. We need to redefine security. Security is no longer the hard power military might. While that military might has a role to continue to play in guaranteeing security, security is increasingly driven by the need for things like human security, water, food, health care, the need to prevent the spread of diseases that are potential threats. Security needs to be examined from the standpoint of cybersecurity and the potential damages there. But that redefinition of security also means we must redefine the role of the United States. Just as the United States post-Cold War has had to figure out, and in a lurching, halting, non-systematic approach, has had trouble grappling with how to redefine its own role vis-a-vis its relationship with Russia, vis-a-vis its relationship with the European Union. The way we are having to redefine our relationship in our interactions with our fellow members of NAFTA and our fellow members of the Western Hemisphere, so too the U.S. must try to redefine its role in Asia, one that is not threatened by the rise of China, one that does not misunderstand the cultural norms and histories of the region, and one that redefines its own role in the context of a new definition of security.
I'm going to go ahead and stand because I can't really see this right side of the audience. But I'd also like to take the opportunity to kind of summarize how we got to where we are right now. We had a great introduction, listening to ambassadors talk about the context, the perspective, the big picture of U.S. and Asian relations between all these different countries, multilateral issues, both political and economic. And from that context, we went to talk about the political issues, the socio-political context, the political problems in between sovereign nations and how to overcome those challenges. And then we talked about national security issues. How do we retain the ability to make our own future in a self-determinate way? And we wrapped it up with economic context and talked about how vitally connected economics and politics and relations and even going as far as religious issues, cultural issues. It's all integrated into one big picture. And the big takeaway I came out with is, where are we wanting to go? What are the main benefits that we're hoping to achieve by having better relations between the United States and the various different countries? And there were so many great points made about how we shouldn't perceive how the world should be according to our own unique perspective and impose that on others. We should be respectful of different competing ideas of where we should all go into the future. And especially when you have two very big powers, China and the United States, trying to duke it out over who has supremacy over all of these issues. And all of that kind of came to a head when I thought about this third question in my group, the economic context group. It said, how can the future economic development of Asia promote more equitable prosperity and stable growth patterns? Equitable prosperity. What does that mean? When we think about where we need to be going with U.S.-Asia relations, are we imposing something upon the results that we're hoping to achieve that may not even be possible? So I understand where the question is coming from. Right now we have countries with different levels of power, and therefore they have different levels of prosperity, different abilities to grow into the future. That variation is difficult to bear when you think about how some people are living on $2 or $3 or $4 a day versus other countries where they are living on $30, $40, $50,000 a day, or excuse me, a year, which is much more than $2 or $3 a day. Yeah, Michael Jordan or some of the other stars might be sitting on their royalties, understanding that level of income. But what I'm trying to get at here is, if we're focused primarily on let's get rid of that inequality in prosperity and growth, let's focus on whatever the relations are, let's make that a priority in the end, we may be asking for something that is basically impossible. And here's where I'm coming from. As an economist, we teach in the principles class, where does prosperity come from? It comes from the fact that we have different individuals with different skills and talents and willing to do certain things, not willing to do other things. How do you take advantage of that? You allow people to specialize in their lowest opportunity cost pursuit and trade with others who have specialized in their different lowest opportunity cost pursuit. And that specialization and exchange creates prosperity. It creates growth. We teach that in the principles of economics. Now, if that's true, and if what drives that process of discovery of who has specialized areas that are compatible with mine so we can trade, if that takes entrepreneurship, and that is, we need to motivate people to pursue entrepreneurship, if instead we're worried about how do we set up ways of equalizing outcomes, equalizing profitability of applying your labor to a particular task, that can only be had by redistributing existing income, redistributing existing wealth. And that is going to deter pursuing entrepreneurial activity, thinking about innovative ways of answering questions that takes lots of effort, lots of risk. If you take away the profitability of doing that, the ability to say, I am different and therefore I have made more money, more profits than others because they haven't pursued something that I have identified, if we start taking that away and redistributing in the hopes of equalizing prosperity and equalizing or stabilizing economic growth, is that possible if prosperity emanates from people pursuing their comparative advantage, countries pursuing their comparative advantage, lowest opportunity cost process of making goods and services? The ultimate result is going to be some people have skills, willingness to do things that happen to be answers to consumer demands that were not foreseen before, couldn't be planned upon, couldn't be orchestrated in advance. That's entrepreneurship. Can we find a future where growth rates are relatively stable and prosperity is relatively equal across all countries, not just in Asia, globally, worldwide? Is that an impossible goal upon which to create all kinds of diplomatic efforts and international strategies and all of this? I worry about that. I worry about that. And anyway, I don't want to take up too much time, but that might be one of the challenges we have to think about in terms of how best to go forward with Asian and U.S. relations.
Well, I have the pleasure of calling this to a closure. But first of all, what I want to do is give my thanks. First of all, I want to thank the students that were here today from Clemens High School and also from Stephen F. Austin State University. If you can take one message back to your school, I think you should tell them you made them proud. I think everyone here was impressed by the quality of the questions, by your engagement, and by your enthusiasm. Second of all, I'd like to thank our panelists who are still distributed through the audience. They were informative, frequently very provocative, but always very stimulating. I also like to thank our moderators who are sitting here. It was their very difficult job to keep the sessions coherent, to keep them on time, and to keep them always with a clear focus. And they did that and succeeded to an extraordinary degree. And lastly, I'd like to thank Dixie Grohl. Where's Dixie? Is he here? No. Well, you can tell her what I'll say. Usually it begins, I walk into Dixie's office and I say, Dixie, I have an idea. And she goes, oh no. And this was one of my ideas. And I have an idea and then I turn it over to Dixie and she makes it a reality. And for everyone who came here, she did this job with thoroughness. And the thing that I appreciate mostly is with a human touch. So I'd like to thank her for all of her hard work putting this together. Now, let me just say one or two quick words in conclusion, and we'll finish up. I think one of the things that we came in here with was a sense that Asia is a very confusing place because Asia is very, very diverse. But we had a day and a half worth of panel discussions, and one of my favorite quotes is by Mark Twain when he talked about the music of Wagner. And he said, his music is better than it sounds. And I think after our discussions for this last day and a half, I think Asia seems a lot more clear to everyone now than it probably did before they walked in. I hope you learned something, and I hope occasionally even changed your mind. One of my approaches that when I change my mind is a quote by Ashley Brilliant that says, my opinions may have changed, but not the fact that I am right. So you can go with that. Our discussions for the last day and a half were not just for edification. We do hope to have a long-term impact. Even the smallest foot can leave an imprint on the world, and that's what we hope to do. We will be taking the discussions that we concluded with today and evolving those into an edited book so that our discussions today filter much further than this room here in Houston, Texas. I invite you to return next year because your questions have now become part of our dialogue. One of my favorite singers is a guy by the name of Guillermo Anderson, who is from Honduras. He has a wonderful quote, and he says, since the earth is round, any place can be the center of the world. And so I think for a day and a half, let it be Houston, Texas next year when we talk about Africa. So again, I hope to see everyone next year. And if you have any questions, I hope our panelists can stay and discuss with you. But for all intents and purposes, like Moses said, I will let my people go. So thank you.